Sapna Rakesh ma'am and Gopal Krishna sir. Thank you for being with us today, sir. So I would like to begin the session with a short introduction of our wonderful college, the Institute of Management Studies. So the Institute of Management Studies, best introduction I can give of IMS has been given multiple times. So I'm going to try something new. I'm going to introduce IMS as I see IMS. So IMS has over 3 decades of experience, over 3 decades of crafting leaders and shaping the future of students who enter and explore the past and the present of education and improve the study of the same through the application of values such as integrity, tolerance, and mutual respect amongst all of the students and everybody else. The Institute of Management Studies is held as a stalwart of business education across North India, and we have received numerous accolades for the same. Most recently, IMS was ranked as the #1 private BBA institution in Uttar Pradesh by the Times B School 2020 survey. First in Uttarakhand, second in All India, and ninth globally for placements by and we were also ranked as the best BBA and BCA institute in North India by the Asia Pacific 2019 Education Leadership Awards. So moving forward, I would like to give a short introduction of the Career Development Center at the CDC at IMS Ghaziabad University Courses campus. The CDC aims at nurturing students and working professionals in the areas related to career trajectory, skill development, and personality assessments. The classes and workshops help students realize their full potential for professional and personal development. CDC enables students to identify their strengths, discover their latent skills, and create an action plan in order to achieve the highest pinnacles of success. The objective is to accentuate one's ability to transcend oneself into paragons of efficiency, which we can map to the corporate and societal expectations. The center invites resource people and experts regularly as part of the career enrichment talk to the campus to make the students ready for facing challenges by making constant efforts in the right direction. The CDC organizes these career enrichment talks on various topics to help the students further clarify and evaluate their current positions regarding effective planning in the future. Today, right now, they have gathered here for the Career Enrichment Talk Series 5 on youth and career development, where we wish to learn from life experience of our resource person, Gopal Krishna Vishwanath sir and Dr. Sapna Rakesh ma'am. Now, I would like now, moving forward now, from this point, I would like to introduce the guests that we have to all of the audience gathered here today. Let me first introduce someone whose introduction isn't really very necessary. Let me begin with the introduction of Gopal Krishna sir. Gopal Krishna sir, like anyone who's on Quora, like me, we know Gopal Krishna sir. We feel Gopal Krishna sir is part of our family as much as our own grandfather. Gopal Krishna sir has professionally worked for a very, very lengthy period of time. Sir has worked for almost 3 decades in the role of structural engineer at Mecon Limited and has went on to play various roles such as a general manager at an outsourcing company. And sir has created, sold and advised his own detailing company. Now, sir, we are very privileged to have you here with us today. And thank you so much for being with us today, sir. So moving forward, I would like to introduce our visionary director, Dr. Sapna Rakesh ma'am. Any introduction I give to you is very short and concise because it's not possible to fit all of your accomplishments in a short introduction. Ma'am is a leader who has been published in multiple journals. Ma'am has received the Rashtriya Shiksha Puraskar. And more than that, I feel the best introduction I can give ma'am is the reason the Institute of Management Studies feels less like an educational institute and more like a family that's coming together to help each other grow mutually. And I believe that's what I can say best. Thank you so much for being with us today, ma'am.
Thank you.
Now, moving forward, I would also like to welcome Dean Dr. Rakesh Kumar Singhal, sir, along with the chairperson of the Management Department, Dr. Geeti Sharma, ma'am, and chairperson of the IT Department, Dr. Gagan Varshney. Now, with the blessings of all involved, I would like to move forward in the session and begin with the questions that we have received from the students. So the first question that I would like to ask is to Gopal Krishna sir. So you are a very experienced person. You are a very senior person with a very rich experience in life. Could you please share some of those experiences that have played a significant role in shaping you into the person that you are today? So,
Oh, you are asking for literally my autobiography. Anyway, I'll try to do whatever justice is possible in this limited time. I was born in Palakkad district in Kerala, and my parents moved to Mumbai when I was an infant. And I had my schooling in Mumbai. Right from my age, age of 9 months when I moved till 1967, the age of 18, I've been a schoolboy in Mumbai. I studied at the Don Bosco High School in English medium with Hindi and Gujarati as additional languages. Those 18 years I spent with my parents, guided by them and protected by them. My first major experience was in leaving Mumbai, leaving the protective care of my parents and moving to BITS Pilani to a hostel and being an engineering student for 5 years at BITS Pilani. That was the first major shake-up in my life. I bore it bravely. In fact, I went through the pangs of separation from parents, and for 5 years, I spent my time studying civil engineering at BITS Pilani. That was one major big experience for me. And I moved to a cosmopolitan atmosphere. I moved to a Hindi speaking region. I learned Hindi due to exposure with a lot of Hindi speaking fellow students, and also learned to live on my own away from parents and seeing them only once a year when I used to go for my summer holidays. That was my first major life experience that was out of the ordinary for me. Next, I spent 2 more years at the University of Roorkee, today called the IIT Roorkee, doing my master's in structural engineering. There too, for the first time, a different experience was that this time I wasn't dependent on my parents anymore for my income. I was happy to get a scholarship from the government of India. Those days, believe it or not, it was just 250 rupees. I don't know how much it is today, but those 250 rupees was enough for me to pay my mess bills, pay all my hostel charges, and pay my uh, tuition fees too, and also have a little leftover for buying books and to buy my train ticket from Roorkee to Mumbai, which was just 18 rupees those days. So that was another major experience for me, getting a master's degree. Then, next major personal experience was my marriage. It was an arranged marriage, and it's slightly different from the usual arranged marriages that you see. I met my wife at Marina Beach for the first time, where our parents had arranged for us to meet. It was completely unconventional. Otherwise, normally, if you see any typical Bollywood film of those days, arranged marriages where the families of the boy and the girl, they meet at their house, and it's a very formal encounter in the drawing room. This wasn't anything like that. It was a meeting at the beach where we were left alone to talk to each other. And in 1 hour, both of us sat and decided the future course of our life and decided to marry each other. That was another completely novel experience for me. The next experience was my job. As soon as I passed my engineering examinations and for Roorkee, I appeared for only one competitive examination. That was the competitive examination conducted by Hindustan Steel Limited. At that time, all the steel plants came under one company called Hindustan Steel Limited, and that controlled the Bokaro Steel Plant, the Bhilai Steel Plant, and the Durgapur Steel Plant. And they had a common entrance exam for recruitment of executives for their steel plants and also for their engineering and design bureau. I got through their exam with flying colors because I had definitely an advantage. I was a master's, the degree holder in structural engineering. And as soon as I got through, I was selected and posted at this company called Nikon. The original name was Central Engineering and Design Bureau of Hindustan Steel. It was renamed as Nikon, Metallurgical and Engineering Consultants. Its head office was at Ranchi, and I was asked to report for training at Bokaro Steel Plant. So that was in 1974 when I left Mumbai once again and proceeded all the way to Bokaro, to a strange place. It was Bihar at that time. It wasn't Jharkhand at that time. Jharkhand didn't exist at that time. I spent 6 weeks at Bokaro And it was a completely new experience for me, living alone in a hostel and getting exposed to massive steel structures that you see in a steel plant. It was absolutely unnerving. Those tall structures, 70 meters high, huge pipelines, and with all that smoke, noise, and dust, and the dangers that you see in a steel plant. I spent 6 weeks over there getting complete exposure to all aspects of a steel plant running. And then later on, I was interviewed and then asked to proceed to Bangalore, where our company had just opened a new regional office. This was the design office. So I was fortunate to be selected and posted at the design office at Bangalore City in 1974. I proceeded to Bangalore. It was a completely new place. I had never been to Bangalore before. And I landed up there and stayed as a paying guest with my uncle for a short time till I got married a few months later. And then I moved into a small flat of my own. Believe it or not, I paid only 180 rupees rent for a small house with a hall, bedroom, and a kitchen. And my salary was 750 rupees. With 750 rupees those days in 1974, me and my wife could live a comfortable life. If you would like to know some of the prices, milk used to cost hardly, I think, 1 rupee 10 paisa a liter. Petrol was 3 rupees 10 paisa a liter. And my electricity bill was 18 rupees. I'm just giving you this because nobody believes that such prices are possible. But that is how we managed to live comfortably on 750 rupees a month. Big experience. The next big experience was, of course, the birth of my daughter in 1977 and, and the experience of parenthood. I sent my child to school, and then we had decided that those days, because of hardships and because of middle class status, we are going to have only one kid. That was a decision which we reviewed 9 years later. And that was another big experience. We decided to have one more son after 9 years. And if I hadn't taken the decision, I wouldn't have had a son who in future went on to become a Rhodes Scholar and proceed to Oxford, get his master's degree in philosophy, and now today he teaches at Cambridge University. That was another big life-changing decision that I had taken. Next, my job. 28 years I served in a public sector undertaking, and I was a consultant in the area of design steel structures for steel plants and industrial buildings. I went through the entire range of activities, starting from reports, feasibility studies, cost estimates, preliminary designs, tender document preparation, then design of structures, analysis of structures, making their drawings, getting the drawings approved, getting vendors' drawings approved, then issuing the drawings for fabrication, visiting the fabricator's shop to inspect their structures, and visiting site in order to see the structures were all well erected in accordance with our drawings, and also certifying those structures for completion, and also certifying the contractor's bids. It was a very, very broad, right from the beginning up to the end. Anything to do with design of steel structure, I had this exposure. I began as an assistant design engineer, and after 28 years, for the last 6 years of my career, I headed the same department which I had joined as a junior most executive. This was in 1999. Then very significant event took place. The company was going through a bad time. The steel industry was going through a recession. And then I found that my career had come to a dead end. I was no longer a technical executive. They kicked me upstairs and made me a manager. And then now I had to start managing people, managing clients, something in which I wasn't really interested. I loved my job too much. But then there was no way out. The juniors were there to do the job, and I had to fit into that management slot. Then, out of the blue, the company introduced a voluntary retirement scheme. I was the first in my company to opt for it and to take my chances elsewhere because I wanted to be in the technical field. My company refused to release me. They said, no, it's not meant for you. It's meant for people whom we want to get rid of. You are an asset. We are not going to let you go. I fought with them for almost a year, trying to persuade them to let me go. They just wouldn't. So ultimately, when I found that I was losing a lot of good opportunities, I gave my resignation. Now, at the age of 52, I resigned a well-paying job and my children were well settled in schools and colleges. What prompted me to do that? It was another big experience for me. That was in 1999-2000 when the internet entered India. A new business opportunity came up which nobody knew about. That's a business called technical knowledge process outsourcing, business process outsourcing, all kinds of businesses where the cost difference between American countries and European countries, and the cost difference, the living costs and the labor costs, was so drastic that it paid handsomely to get those jobs done in India and send them across using this internet medium to the ultimate client. So a number of businesses sprung up, and one of them was preparation of drawings and preparation of connection designs and various miscellaneous work connected with the design of steel structures. So American architects and fabricators saw a new opportunity. They found that India would do the job for them at 1/7 of the price. I repeat, at 1/7 of the price. That was the drastic difference in costs of executing a job at site. They would keep, of course, the creative part of the job for themselves. They wouldn't offload that. But 90% of the job, which was just grunt work, they wanted an external agency in one of these countries like India, Philippines, and so many other European countries like Romania. And this business was facilitated by the advent of the internet. So a private company made me an offer, and they said, we'll make you the general manager. You assemble a team of about 20 or 30 people, as many as you want, we don't mind. You set up this division and run this company for us. I took a chance, and then I resigned my job. And at twice the salary, I moved and joined this private limited company. It was originally a software management company, a software and a management consultancy company. They made me this offer, and I joined them. I was their general manager for 2.5 years. I set up the company and ran it for 2.5 years. Things changed. As soon as this business flourished, hundreds of people from all over the country jumped in, and the competition was intense. Prices came down. It was difficult to run the business. We were an ISO 9001 company, and then we found that the prices were coming down. It was no longer profitable. I found that I had to work extra hard. I was to work about 12 to 14 hours a day. This wasn't acceptable to me. My health was suffering. I was also growing old. I was about 53 or 54 at that time. That's when I decided that instead of working hard like this, let me do this job for myself. It needed guts. A middle class man with a complete background like mine doesn't easily invest money and then give up a paying job and start a startup of his own. But somehow somebody motivated me to do it, and I found a very good sponsor in America who trusted me and who had faith in my capabilities and who partly agreed to invest part of the money that is needed to set up this company. I set up a company called HiQ Design and Detailing Private Limited in the year 2004, and set up shop in my own house. I moved to an apartment. I modified my house is quite large, it's about 2,000 square feet. I broke open all the internal walls, created halls and open spaces, set up an office there, invested in all the necessary hardware and software, assembled a team of 17 engineers, fresh from the engineering college, and trained them, recruited them, trained them, and taught them, and ran this business for at least 6 to 8 years before developments took place which forced me to give it up. That was my health. My health failed me. I had a heart attack, and then I had some strange arthritic ailments which made me, bedridden. I couldn't walk too much. At the same time, business too suffered because the subprime crisis hit America in 2008. That's when construction came to a halt in America, and all our projects were put on hold, and we were told to stop the work. That hit me hard. And combined with health, I found that it was getting too much for me. I then put in my papers and retired. In 2011, I retired and leading a retired life. So these are the major experiences in life. And last major decision was personal. Both my children were well settled in life. They had moved abroad and they were doing extremely well in their careers. I was also getting on old. I was now 63 or 64 at that time. No, 66 at that time. And we felt that it is not reasonable on our part to expect our children to give up their bright futures abroad where they were well settled and come back just to take care of us. We ought to take care of ourselves. The joint family is now history. We have to take care of ourselves. They have to take. Of course, I could count on their support for any kind of help that I needed. But I felt that if I needed their support, I should go to them. I should expect them to give up their citizenship and their jobs there to come and take care of me. That would be unreasonable. So we decided that we are going to move into a retirement home. In our family, normally retirement homes are not usually favorably looked upon. So we had to do a lot of convincing to us. A lot of people, including our best decision for us. And In March 2018, I moved to a retirement home where I'm now well settled. We have a caretaker taking care of us. We have a doctor full time, and we have all the facilities of a carpenter, a plumber, an electrician, and we have a dining hall where we do not have to cook, and all our requirements are taken care of. I am very happily and well settled in that retirement. So these are my life-changing experiences, which I would like to share with you. Next.
So, thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us, sir. I find it hard to believe that petrol was ever 3 rupees and 10 paise
Yes.
per liter. But
By
it's
the way,
really
I
nice
bought a
to know that there
motorcycle.
was
I bought a
time like that.
motorcycle, a ESD motorcycle for 6,250 rupees, and I had it for 8 years. I bought a bullet motorcycle for 10 years, for 10,000 rupees. I rode it, and I bought my first car for 1,05,000, a brand new Premio Padmini. In fact, I really, I know I find it unbelievable, but that was life those days. But let me tell you, my income too was less. When
Yes.
I built my house in 1986. My salary, my take-home salary was just 2,000 rupees. But we lived comfortably on that. Those times were different.
Yes.
Anyway, what's your next question, sir?
So I would like to ask ma'am a question. Ma'am, you are a very well experienced and a very wonderful leader. So could you share with us some of those experiences that have helped you or that have shaped you into such a gallivanting leader, I should say?
Thank you, Shiv. Is my voice clear?
Yeah,
Yes, ma'am.
very clear. I can hear you.
Thank you so much. It was great listening to you, sir. And, the journey that you've had, that's very, very inspiring. And all of us, I'm sure, would learn a great deal of things today from this session. So, Shiv, as you say, I mean, what have I learned, from my experiences, which worked to be able to lead an institution? I think a couple of things, and I take cues from Sir. One is, how do you spend your time in the school and college? I think that plays a very, very important role. And a couple of lessons that I learned when I look back and try to introspect what worked for me. I always had a feeling that it was, of course, what happened inside the class was very, very important. But what happened outside the class, after the hours of class, gave, they were instrumental in instilling skills, thought processes, which later in my professional life helped me in a big way in dealing with people. Like, just for instance, I was a president guide, and every time you attend scout and guide camps, there would be competitions. Nobody would tell you how much time would you spend, and there is a mandate to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning and be really right out there in the ground. But I remember spending late nights there, waking up early, and doing it. So and this was not driven by anybody. So those experiences of doing things outside the class, I think they were more important than what happened inside the class. That also gave me an opportunity to interact with a variety of people all across the country, from the length and breadth of the country, and understand the individual differences amongst people. It also made me culturally sensitive. When you get an opportunity to move outside the classroom, you actually know that there are, in a competitive field, no gender differences. It is who you are and what you can do. Another thing, which really helped me a lot in dealing with people has been initiative and a lot of self-appreciation. And I tell this to everybody, especially to the student. As a student, it is very, very important for you to understand who you are, accept yourself, appreciate yourself, and then size opportunities and take initiative, because that, I think, so one thing leads to another. Only when you take the first step, you get to see what is about to come. If you do not take that first step, you would not get myriad number of opportunities that others take, who take that first step. So I think another thing that I learned, meeting variety of people, was that one feature which is very, very important for anybody to be happy and to be able to deal with people is integrity. That is, you need to have just I always realize, I mean, whenever I've met people like sir, I've realized that humility and integrity goes hand in hand, and that that gives you a kind of simplicity, and a very, very that makes you more accessible, and you're also able to reach to others. So these are 3 4 things which I personally feel I learned outside the class and not inside the class. Also, so when you work outside the class, you know that there's nobody to handle conflicts. There's nobody who's going to say what is right, what is wrong. So your values also develop over a period of time, and your conflict resolution. Also, you start understanding that conflicts are a part of life, and you should learn to accept people the way they are rather than enforcing what you want. These are, I think, a couple of things which helped me in my leadership position. And let me tell you, a faculty is always a leader. Day one, when you become a faculty and when you enter in a class where 60 different set of students are sitting, you do not need to be a director to become a leader. So my training in leadership started some 22 years back, when I went for the first time to my classroom. And I think these small things that I learned outside the class, on the ground, in the green room, um, being amongst the audience, doing parade in the ground. I think those were the opportunities which shaped a lot of things that helped me deal with people.
Thank you so much, ma'am. And ma'am, I think I understand what you mean to say when you say that life also happens majorly outside the theoretical learning. And ma'am, in the same sense, I believe personally that it's very important for us to have role models, for us to look up to people, look up to goals. Like, for example, I look up to our Prime Minister Narendra Modi. I like the fact that even at such a senior age, such as Gopal Krishna, so even at such a senior age, there is a zest for life. I like that a lot. So in that sense, sir, I would like to ask you, who do you look up to? Who have you looked up to in life? Who have you, followed or imbibed within yourself, sir, to get to such a stellar position?
You mean who are my role models?
Yes, sir.
See, it's difficult to identify whom I can call my role model. I've had different role models at different stages in my life, depending on what field it is in. Well, when I began my life as a little boy, when I was 4, 5, or 6, 7 years, 8 years old, my role model was my own dad. He was the hero to me. So I was always wondering when I would grow up and to be like him. So that you outgrow that slowly, and slowly you become a teenager, and then you go to school and you college. In college and school, I remember some very gifted teachers whom I can never forget. I remember their names. I had a few role models among the teachers, both in school and college. I used to admire their knowledge. I used to admire the way they used to handle students. I used to admire the way they communicated and how they transferred knowledge and how unselfish and sincere they were. When I had those days, I thought that I might possibly become a teacher in my life. I had determined that I was going to be one of them. Though they were my role models. Then, when I joined my company, I had a couple of role models. They were very gifted engineers, senior people, who took me under their wing, and they taught me everything that I knew. I'm eternally grateful to them. They made me a very successful and competent structural engineer that I later became. Those were my role models when I was working in a company. Then, of course, there is in unofficial matters. I have a role model for everything. In sports, the only game I ever played was cricket. My role model, there are 3. I can never forget Kapil Dev. I can never forget 1983, the World Cup that he lifted. And I can never forget that swashbuckling manner in which he batted and he bowled. Then modern role models are, of course, Dhoni and Virat Kohli. These are 3 cricketing role models I have. Then in music, in painting, in writing, in everything, I have some role models, but there are just too many. Among the authors, I was a voracious reader during my younger years. Today, of course, the internet and social media and the laptop and the computers have taken over, and I don't read too many books. But when nothing like this existed, I used to read a lot of books, and I have a large number of people whom I can name as my role models. I thought one day if I become an author, I must be able to write like this. Then musicians too. I admire Lata Mangeshkar, and then I admire a whole array of classical musicians, both instrumentalists and vocalists. I can't name them; they're just too many. I wouldn't like to name one person and think and give you the impression that I consider that person above the others. So I won't take names. Then lately, my current role models are my children. They have achieved amazing success. They were much more successful than I was. And then they have done so well for themselves without any financial support from me. They did well. They went on their own, on their own, got scholarships, and they didn't depend on me to sponsor them in any way. So I really admire them, and I wish everybody had children like them. They are my current role models. That's all for the time being.
So thank you so much, and I really appreciate the fact that you mentioned that you still do have role models, and they are
Yes,
your.
in politics, I have a role model. I am a great admirer of Narendra Modi, and on Quora, people call me an Andh Bhakt, a blind Bhakt. I enjoy that title, and I just laugh it off. But yes, true, I have full faith in him, and I know that he may make mistakes, and I'm quite sure that not all his decisions are okay. But I have not at one moment have I ever doubted his integrity, his sincerity, his hard work, and his good intentions. He's another role model, a political role model.
Absolutely, so. So I understand what you say when you say you admire and you idolize Narendra Modi ji, because I do same. And obviously, sir, all of his decisions cannot be right, because ultimately he is a human being and he is too learning. So that reminds me of this thing Sapna ma'am says often. Ma'am says that a true leader, a true educator never stops learning. They are always learning, even when they are teaching the other people. And that makes me want to ask ma'am, who do you look up to and who do you learn from at this position where you teach others too? So that's my question to you, ma'am.
Shiv, let me share with you all an instance. I went for a training in 2003 at one of the institutions at Mumbai. And because Mumbai, is a crowded place, you do not have luxury of having, big spaces. So this institution lobby had one toilet, and the line queue outside the toilet was always there were always a couple of people waiting, and every time you would use it, you would enter happily and you'll come out happy. So there was this lady, I observed her for 2-3 days, cleaning the toilet. And I asked her one day, my question was, tum kitna baar saaf karti ho? This was my question. And I had one of the greatest learning of my life that day when she said, kitna saaf karti ho matlab? Jab ganda hota hai tab saaf karti hu. And I just... I kept thinking, and still, her answer makes me think that this is how work is looked at by certain people. Many of us would quantify, all right, and we'd like to, we might say every 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or maybe 10 times a day or 24 times a day. But actually, that is the input, the output of a person, of what he's involved into. Her answer completely startled me. So you learn from everywhere. That day I learned from her. As a faculty, for me, there are two things which are important to learn. One is the student behavior. When we look at the students 20 years back, it was altogether a different paradigm. The students looked at us as gurus. And whatever we said, from the books that we had studied was all the gyan that they had. That was the gyan, and that's it. But today, when we enter into the class, we need to, be differently prepared to interact with the students, because whatever is there in the books, students have 30 seconds videos and 25 seconds videos of the summary. So that has kind of become irrelevant. Therefore, the generation today looks at very different things in comparison to what 20 years back students wanted. So one of the very, very important learning everybody, each teacher would derive is from the students. Today learning has become collaborative. We say X and students say Y and Z, and that's how learning happens today. So yeah, I look at students. Then I have two children who are my major critiques. They keep correcting me all the time. They keep correcting me for my pronunciations. They keep correcting me for what I read. One day my son asks me, why do you have to read every day before the class? Have you not read all these books you have in Almera? Are these only for decoration? So there is so much to learn from them, as a matter of fact, and they keep correcting me. Third is, of course, the talented set of people I interact with. They are industry guys, like we have Sir today. There are every day we have a lot of people coming, and we get an opportunity to discuss with them what is happening. And I have these very, very talented colleagues. They're also a great source of learning for me. Each of them, we have about 100 people. I'm very fortunate I get to interact with all of them at different points of time, and they're also a great source of learning. But ultimate source of learning is the Google Baba. I would not say, and of course, indeed, Quora is also a part of it. And I would say one of the important fountains of information and learning today is your ability to sit in front of the computer and do the right kind of research. Because that comes handy. That is very diverse if you are a good researcher, and that gives you viewpoints. So from Harvard Business Review to Quora, everything you learn from. So this is everything that I look up to.
Absolutely, ma'am. And ma'am, as you mentioned Quora, so I would be totally at fault here. I'm sure all of the audience would blame me if I don't ask a question related to Quora to Sir. So, Sir, you have more than 2 lakh followers on Quora, which is a very huge number. I'm sure you are not affected by it, that you have such a huge number of following. But I have to ask, Sir, how did you develop such a huge following on Quora, Sir?
Honestly, I don't know. I never expected that I would be so successful on Quora. I got onto Quora in July 2015, and my first answer had 5 views, no upvotes. And for 2 weeks, those 5 views stayed static. I just stopped writing because I thought nobody's going to read me anymore. So I waited for another 2 weeks before I attempted posting another answer. That too got around the same number, and there were no followers, there were no upvotes. So it was pretty discouraging. After that, it took me another 6 to 7 weeks before I saw an opportunity. I have been living in Bangalore for around 46 years. So somebody asked a question about how Bangalore used to be in the 1970s and the 1980s. Well, that question was right up my alley. I put my heart and soul into that answer and wrote a longish answer, a very nostalgic memory trip about Bangalore and what a heavenly place it was before the internet revolution, when it was truly a garden city, a true pensioner's paradise. And I described life over there. That answer went viral. It initially was read by all the Bangaloreans and the South Indians, and later on it sort of was shared by others, and it soon became, and then I got noticed because of that one answer. Since then, of course, it has been a steady climb for me. Now, to get all these followers, of course, the primary condition, you write well. Good writing. If you're not going to write well, you're not going to get followers. They will just somehow, out of curiosity, they may see what you've written, but they're not going to follow you. They may read you, they may comment, or they may upvote, or just ignore it and proceed. But the most important thing is writing well. Writing well alone is not enough. I am sure there are hundreds of Koreans who write better than me, who are better informed than I am, and who can write on more subjects. I write mostly on life experiences, and because that's my number one subject on which I can talk freely. I don't have to prepare. I don't have to do any reference checking. I don't have to check facts. Everything is in my mind. So I write on my life experiences. I write on Hindi and English translations. I was fortunate enough to have a good grip over the English language, having studied in an English medium school. And then, of course, I spent a lot of time polishing up my English and reading good books. And later on, when I was in Pits Pilani and then I was in Roorkee, I developed a love for the Hindi language, and I taught myself and improved my Hindi too. So I find it fascinating to translate between English and Hindi and between Hindi and English. Not the standard words that you get in, but peculiar phrases, peculiar idioms, which are very typical of that language. How do you say that in the other language? So I developed that. So I used to post a lot of answers on English and Hindi. Then, of course, my core competence is structural engineering. I wrote about 600 or 700 answers on structural engineering, but none of these really got me the followers. My secret, or I would say the most important reason why I got so many followers was because, unlike so many other Koreans, I engaged with my readers. I repeat, I engaged with my readers. It is not enough just to write a good answer. You have to read other answers. Why would somebody follow you? They must like you. And then when they write an answer, if they ask you a question, if you answer it, they notice you. If you post a good comment on a good answer, your name is displayed there. Whereas if you upvote an answer, nobody knows that you've upvoted it. It is just, your upvote is just one among votes. But when you post a comment, a really good comment, a pertinent comment, then your name is there for all to see. And if you consistently post good comments on the writings of good writers, you will be noticed by all their followers. And somebody might decide to check you out, check your profile, and that's how you build up your following. The other thing is my transparency and openness. I have never hidden information. I am well known for being the only person to answer questions which nobody else would answer. People ask about earnings. Everybody is cagey about earnings. I am free. I tell you to the last dollar and cent how much I have earned, when and how. All the figures are put up there. I am the one person who shares intimate details of my family life, unless it's extremely confidential, but it's all the time confined only to myself. I don't discuss my children because I respect their privacy. They have asked me not to disclose details about them, but I am free and I disclose a lot of information about myself. That also, because of that, a feeling of intimacy has developed, and a lot of people look upon me as an uncle or as a grandfather, and they have developed some kind of affection for me. That's another reason for people to follow me. Then the other reason is, if you want more followers, increase your visibility by writing on a subject which is popular and which anybody can read. If you write on Java and Python and very core topics, only those people who are interested in that topic will read you. But if you write on a very general topic, particular life experiences or popular topics like politics, cricket, Trump, Modi, Dhoni, anything, or on a current event, you will find that visibility is more readers will read you, and that's how you pick up more followers. So you have to expand the scope of your writing. Don't just limit yourself. If I had limited myself to writing on structural engineering, then I would not have had as many followers. Probably I would have had just a fraction of these followers. Then this is be approachable and meet people. I have one thing that distinguishes me from the others is that I keep my message box open. My direct messaging, that is my, what is it called, private messages. Once people get about 5,000 or 10,000 followers, they usually shut down their message box. They arrange it so that they get messages only from the people they follow. They don't keep their message box open for anybody. I haven't done that. I know it's a nuisance, but it can get overwhelming sometimes. I have received more than 10,000 messages in the last 5 years I have been here. I answer every single message. I read every single message. I don't answer only if it doesn't need an answer or it doesn't deserve an answer. Some people simply send me links to their writings and ask me to follow, or some people ask me, please join my space, be a moderator, or please contribute to my space. Those kind of messages I just read, but I don't reply. But any person who asks me a question, or asked me for advice, I have always responded. So I have a reputation on Quora for being one of the few who replies to a private message. There are so many young Quorans who very diffidently post a message to me and says, "Hi sir, will you reply to this? Will you notice me?" Then I give them a very heartwarming reply, and that overwhelms them. They immediately, my name spreads, and then people know that I'm a person who can be counted on to reply if you have asked. And I receive an innumerable number of messages asking for personal advice, career-related advice, and other kind of problems. And even if I can't solve their problem, I at least respond. So these are the things that have made me popular, and this is how I got my followers.
So I think I personally can testify to the fact that you reply to every message. I have read a lot of answers that speak to your humbleness and your humility and the fact that you reply to messages, but I genuinely did not expect you to reply to my message. But when I approached you and you replied, it was shocking and it was very pleasant to see that someone who has such a huge following is still so connected with everybody. So someone who has spent such a long time in his professional life, who is such a senior to me, and when you replied, so it was very heartwarming for me, sir. So this leads me to say that you have spent a very long career. You have had a very lengthy career. That your career has been longer than my life has been. That's what I can say. So you have done a lot. You've been a structural engineer. You've started your own startup. You have spent a lot of time in the industry. So, sir, you must have obviously witnessed a lot of changes from petrol being 3 rupees to 83 rupees now, from bullet costing 10,000 to 2.5 lakhs. So, sir, could you relate to us? Could you just specify to us maybe what allowed you to be such a consistent team performer during this lengthy time period?
Well, this is a subject on which I could talk for hours, but I'll be brief. I began my career in 1974 when we did not have even a simple calculator. I used a slide rule. I don't know how many of you have even seen a slide rule and how it is used. We did not have a photocopying machine. We used to go to the typist and ask him to type out copies, and they used carbon paper. They used to keep carbon sheets between paper and type. If you wanted a photocopy, you have to get it typed and take it to a so-called gazetted officer who will certify that it is an original, that it is a true copy, and take his signature and put his seal. Those were the only technological advantage I had was that yes, a telephone existed, an ordinary landline telephone. But then there was no trunk calls. I mean, no, there was no STD calls at that time when I began my career. We used to make drawings using pencil and tracing paper and get ammonia prints. There was no photocopy. There was no computer. There was no software. There was no Wikipedia. There was no Google. We used to do everything the hard way, the long way. Of course, that gave us a tremendous insight into the subject, but then we had that advantage. But then what set me out was my adaptability. Uh, in I had an early advantage. I studied at BITS Pilani, as I said. In 1970, there were only 4 computers in India. Delhi University had one, IIT Kanpur had one, IIT Mumbai had one, and then computer BITS Pilani arranged because MIT, there is Massachusetts Institute of Technology, with whom we had a collaboration. They were getting rid of their old IBM 1130, and then they transport that computer back to India and give it to us. So I was there in the civil engineering department when that computer arrived, because only our department had the space to accommodate that big, huge computer that needed a whole hall. So I was there when it was unloaded. I made friends with the operators, and on my own initiative, I learned card punching and how to write simple programs. I learned Fortran programming, and when I had graduated, I knew enough about programming in at least one language, that is Fortran. That was good enough those days for science and engineering. So when I joined in my company, structural design involves an enormous amount of calculations. I had a great advantage. We had an account with our computer at the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, and I used to go all the way on my motorcycle, 6 kilometers one way and 6 kilometers another way, to go submit the cards, punch it, and then get the results and come back. So With this, I was able to do things which my bosses couldn't. My bosses were all computer illiterate. Of course, they were brilliant engineers. They were very good at their jobs, but they could not handle a computer. They even don't know about it. They were in fact suspicious of it. And in fact, I even remember the time when I first submitted my calculations with a computer. My boss called me to his table and said, "I don't believe this. Please bring your slide rule, sit in front of me and repeat the calculations manually and convince me that it was okay." When I had done additions using a calculator, he called me and then he physically checked it by adding it himself. They didn't trust electronics. So that was the kind of time that I've been through. So from then, methods of work were totally different. I adapted. So every time there was an opportunity to learn something new, I grabbed the opportunity. When spreadsheets first arrived and the personal computer first arrived in 1980, I was among the first in my organization to go and sit in front of it, get my hands on it, and learn to type on the keyboard. I learned spreadsheet handling using an old software called Multiplan. I don't know whether anybody of you heard about it. Then later on, there was another spreadsheet called Lotus 123. And then we used to do typing. At that time, I was among the only people who, other than the typist, could type something flawlessly. And that was using word processing software called WordStar and WordPerfect and so many other software that existed at that time. Microsoft Word didn't exist at that time. Excel didn't exist and PowerPoint didn't exist. I learned presentation software on my own. When PowerPoint didn't exist, there was a software brought out by IBM called IBM Storyboard. It was a crude version of Microsoft PowerPoint, and I impressed my bosses tremendously by making nice slides and projecting them. They were all so impressed. They said, "Oh my God, I'm watching a movie right at my table." So that was the kind of thing. Because of my computer background, I was able to do that. So I adapted. I learned to use the calculator. I used to use the computer. And then the biggest change was when the internet first arrived in India, 1999. No one knew anything about it. So I was the first to jump on to the internet bandwagon. And the first app that I learned was the killer app called email. Till then, we relied on typed documents, sending them by post, and then sending them by courier. This is the kind of, and then it used to take days for the documents to reach from one office to another office. But then this was absolutely amazing. An email reaching the recipient within 5 minutes. People couldn't even believe that such a thing could happen. So I learned how to use an email and how to send an email and receive an email. And in fact, I became extremely popular. Till then, drawings were made by hand. When AutoCAD first arrived in the mid-80s and when structural analysis programs first arrived in the late 80s, I was the first to latch onto it and become good at it and practice hard and became really good at it. So I taught my colleagues how to draw using AutoCAD. Those days, we didn't even have a mouse. We used to use the keyboard to move the cursor. So we used to move the keyboard, the 4 arrow keys up, down, left, around. That's the way we used to make lines and make drawings. Of course, those drawings used to take double the time that my draftsman used to do when he draws it manually. Because at that time, blocks didn't exist. You couldn't copy, paste. You couldn't do anything. The software was very primitive. But at least we made a beginning. So all that, I was constantly updating myself with the latest in technology. The internet, then when Google came, I learned how to use it. I learned how to use Wikipedia. And later on, it was too late for me. 3D modeling packages arrived. So now the need for making drawings manually is gone. Today, we create a model on the screen using software like CATIA, then Pro Engineer, and Tekla, SDS2. These are called modeling packages where you create your structure, or an architect creates his building live virtually on the screen. He can move around it, he can examine it closely, examine various alternatives, go on fiddling with parameters, improve it, and finally press a button for the computer to produce all the drawings automatically and also give all the related documents like quantities, bill of materials, bolt list, nut list, everything. By the time I could get to all this, I was too old. I had outgrown all this and I had become a manager. So I left it and I encouraged my subordinates to pick up and I invested a huge amount of money of my own in my startup in buying all this software and enabling them. So this is how I have adjusted to changes in my work. So my advice to you all is, at every stage in history, there is something which is novel, something which is current. Find out what is trending and immediately latch onto it and be an early bird. My being an early bird in computers helped me get across and get ahead of my colleagues and also impress my bosses. So my advice to you is find out what is today. I don't know it. Maybe it's artificial intelligence. Maybe it's cryptocurrency. I don't understand anything of that. But then all these things, if they are current, find out what it is and be the first in the line. Be the early bird, and you will go far in life. That's all that I have to say about this.
So I think what you have said, what I see from that, sir, is that you have witnessed a lot of change from times when you use slide rulers to times when the entire model of a building or a structure is created online on the computer. And the computer creates everything from the budget to the amount of materials required.
Yeah.
And the thing is, sir, we are still witnessing such a huge rate of change that it's blinding to understand how much change you are seeing constantly day to day. So I think, sir, I would like to ask ma'am this question. Ma'am, as sir has said, change is the only constant that we can believe in. Ma'am, what would you recommend us as new job aspirants, as children, students that are just entering the job markets? Yes, sir.
1 minute. My computer battery is dying down. I'm just logging on into another computer. So just bear with me in case you suddenly lose me. I have got another computer laptop ready.
No issues, sir. No
I had a technical problem today. The plug point, where I plug my laptop into this, that suddenly gave way. So I was running it on battery all this time, and it is now showing, it's just showing 14% or 13% remaining. So if you suddenly lose me, I've got another laptop ready. Within a minute or two, I'll be back online.
Absolutely.
Proceed.
No issues at all, sir. So, ma'am, what I'm trying to ask is, ma'am, how should we, as new entrants into the industry, as new marketeers, as new students, new writers, prepare ourselves for the barrage of change that we can see coming soon?
Yeah, Chip, I think this is one of the most topical issue we struggle with as faculty. What path to direct our students to, how to develop themselves for tomorrow so that they have a sustainable career. Now, to me, there are two things which would build tomorrow's career. One is the appreciation of the fact that today the skills required by industry or to become an entrepreneur, they are in complete flux. What you have today, you do not need tomorrow. And that holds true not only for freshers, that holds true also for people who are in the middle of their career or at the fag end of their career or who have just started their career. So the required skills are in a continuous flux. That's one. And this is one problem I would want to share with all of you, which industry also faces. Because industry does not look at recruiting people who have a current skill only. Industry is also looking at people who will be fit for the skills that would be required 5 years down the line. So we are all in a constantly new in a scenario where constantly new demands are coming on us. So how do we sum this up? One, that apart from what you are being taught in the institution, each student should understand what are their core strengths. Degrees are not going to fetch jobs tomorrow. What is going to fetch jobs and careers, or for that matter, businesses, is your vertical strengths. So let's say those students who are doing BBA or those who are doing BCA, let's say those who are doing BBA, you need to identify what do I really want to do. And within that vertical, today, like the students who are studying marketing, knowing marketing is not enough. Knowing technology is equally important. Knowing technology is not enough. Developing yourself, developing negotiation skills, understanding industry verticals, etc., etc. There's so many things a student is expected to know, and you would not know all of them. None of you can know each of them. Therefore, it is important for us to identify our core strengths and build on core strengths. Second is where most of the students and industry who recruits your generation, struggle is the type of attitude people have. I think that is one area where all of you will have to work. Uh, Today, even when we hire faculty for that matter, let me tell you, one distinct characteristic that we want, attribute that we want in each faculty is their ability to learn. We do not want people to harp on what they already know, because we understand everybody will have certain experiences and learnings. But we want people who are ready to learn tomorrow and change themselves tomorrow. That is one. Now, this comes from the type of attitude you have. So, one is developing knowledge, understanding core strength. Another is developing the learning aptitude, the ability to learn. The third thing that I look at for students of tomorrow going for a career is that you should have a portfolio approach. When you go and sit with anybody, either selling a business or yourself with your skills, you should have a portfolio. Your journey of 3 years should be an interesting one. What did you learn in first year? What did you learn in second year? What are the industries where you had a live exposure? What are the projects you have done? How much have you written? Because a student is expected to write. A student is expected to participate. A student is expected to have a portfolio of certain outcomes that he has had apart from the degree that he has got. So all of you should work with this portfolio approach, where each year something must add apart from your college degree to your portfolio. One important scenario that all of us need to understand, you see, in past 20 years, we saw that there were no lifelong jobs. When we started our careers, we wanted to retire from the same organization. We wanted to spend some 10, 20 years in the same organization. But over the years, we learned that this is not going to happen. All right. So there was no permanent organization for us. Now we are seeing that not only the organization, you would not have permanent careers also. So today you are doing something else. 5 years down the line, 3 years down the line, the business landscape is going to change. And as the business landscape changes, you would need to adapt yourself to the new landscape and find a niche there where you can be of some use. And in that light, it is very important for all of you to understand that a lot of jobs would come into sachets to you. All right, we learned sachets in the consumer goods, but now you would get your payments in sachets, which means that a lot of freelancing will become the order of the day. So and once you are a freelancer, it is basically who you are, you will be able to sell. So develop yourself with that approach, have a lot of flexibility, have learnability, have a portfolio, have things which are apart from the degree that you are earning. All right. And if you are able to, and I'm not saying that do 100 things, pick up 5 things, pick up 4 things, but learn them well. Right? And have an attitude to learn new things. I think that is going to be the order of tomorrow. It has already arrived. It has already arrived. It's already happening. But I think 3 years, 5 years down the line, after pandemic, we are going to see more careers and jobs towards this than lifelong careers.
Yes, ma'am. I think I understand and agree with what you have said to a very high degree. The fact that we need to develop multiple skill sets, not only those that help us now in the career that we are opting for, but also for future careers that we might opt for. So I agree with what you're saying, ma'am, and I think I understand what you're trying to say to us. So would you be connecting from this screen, or will you be logging in from another device? Ma'am, you're on mute.
We are unmuting him. It will just take a second, yeah.
Yeah.
No issues, ma'am.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, you are audible.
Yeah, I have logged in on another computer. This is my sister-in-law's computer. The name says Lata Shiv Prasad.
Sir, so what ma'am said, I wanted to ask you something in leading to that, sir.
Okay.
So ma'am just said that earlier there was a time when people used to settle in jobs and they used to settle in for life. They used to dream of retiring from the same job that they started at. Nowadays, forget jobs, not even careers are permanent. Careers change in life. So you have worked for a very long period in a single organization, and you have changed careers, or not careers, so you have changed your field at a very senior age, from being a structural engineer to being a founder of a startup to being a writer on the internet. So I think you are the right person for me to ask this to. Would you say that it is never too late to change careers, or is there a point of time where you have to stick to what you have done and subscribe to it?
Absolutely. There is no age which is too late for anything. Well, let me tell you that I learned typing at the age of 42. And till the age of 62, I never knew that I writing. I started writing blogs. I started participating in various forums. 1 minute. Switched off. Just mute it or close it. Sorry, the other laptop is also disturbing me. It's about to.
I log out from you.
Just log off. Sorry. 1 minute.
No issues at all, sir.
Just please wait for a minute. We are trying to suppress the noise from the other laptop. Or just why don't you reduce the volume? Just reduce the volume.
I just muted. It's already muted.
No,
I,
then I should be muted here then.
No, I hear. No, that won't impact.
Okay.
Now I don't think there'll be an echo.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah. As I was saying, there's no age which is too late for anything. I learned to start writing. In fact, all through my career, all that I ever written was letters, official letters to clients, to customers, and to other departmental heads, to my colleagues. And I used to write reports, but never general writing. Never. The only general writing I ever used to do was to write a letter to my parents or to my relatives or friends. That was all. But the moment I retired, I found that I had a lot of time on my hands and I needed to find a way to keep myself gainfully occupied, to avoid loneliness and depression. This was a godsend. Quora was a godsend for me. I started writing and then I was amazed at how successful I was in this. So when I can do that at the age of 65, why can't those who are younger do anything they want at any age? So go right ahead. Never allow age to ever stop you from starting something new if you are really interested and motivated to try. That's all I have to say.
Thank you so much, sir. So, so I would like to ask ma'am a question that, ma'am, you have held a leadership position and you have also worked with people in leadership positions. As a member of team, any team, we face a lot of conflicts when we work together. Ma'am, what would your tips be, I would say, to develop a workplace etiquette that helps us be good team performers?
Well, I think it is all of you would be doing Zohari window, and there are certain transactions between people which we call win-win. So, see, conflict arises when I perceive somebody as, snatching my opportunity. That is the time when people become insecure. So, as a leader, so first as a leader. So, when you are a leader, it is we should take care that everybody gets that comfort zone and a space of their own and the respect for their skills and respect for the work that they are doing. I think that is very, very important. And the resources of the organization should also be, justifiably distributed to the people. That is organization's job. And I people by engaging your employees in that manner. So that's one. Second is when you deal with people, all your communication interaction should be win-win. You should let people also win. I mean, it's never a boss's day, and I think those times are gone now. Anybody who does not understand this will not be able to lead a team, and if you're not able to lead the team, then you would be the first person who would be actually a loser. So I think there are a lot of lessons to be learned from cricket, for that matter, as Sir also mentioned. We have these great cricketing legends, Virat Kohli, Mahendra Singh Dhoni, and if you read how they manage their teams and the way they have and a lot of leadership comes from everywhere else. If you look at modern day leadership, today you are not leading, you are only a facilitator. If you could understand that, everyone in the team has a space, everyone is contributing, and as a matter of fact, towards each goal, they are all contributing more than how much you are contributing. So that realization, I think, makes a very, very important lesson for all leaders. Now, as a subordinate, whenever I have worked as a subordinate, your own integrity, transparency, your ability to speak what you have in mind, and your ability, one thing, which I always tell even to the students who say that I have a conflict with my parents over what I should do. And I tell them that you should sit down and negotiate. And negotiation does not mean that you are negotiating to win. You negotiate because there will always be a conflict between two people's goal. And you have to arrive at a consensus. And you should have a positive attitude to accept what the team decides. It will not always be what you want. Because once you work in a team, there are team goals. And team should win, not you as an individual. So once that realization comes, and I think that is the job of the leader primarily, to set that culture in the organization. But beyond that, as an individual, when you join a team, because I have seen people suffering a lot, and they suffer a lot, especially in the time when the team's goal changes. So a new person comes and he says that now this is what we want to do, and they've been in a habit of dealing with the past leader and they were doing very well. So they are in that zone frozen. And it's very difficult for them to unlearn what they had done and relearn and re-strategize and start contributing to the new goals. So as a young person, it is very, very important for all of you to understand that you do not work for yourself, you work for your organization, you work for your team, and if the goals are set and if that's what you need to achieve, then you will have to be with the team with your positive energy. So I think these are the two things as a subordinate, and this worked very well for me throughout my career. So many a times we compromise on what we want to do and align ourselves with what organization wants to do. Another thing is give a space, have win-win relationships, win-win transactions with the people around you, respect them for what they are doing, and be very sincere, honest, and negotiate whenever you do not want to accept what's coming your way. Show your creativity, speak up what you want. That's it. Yeah.
So ma'am, from what you have said, what I grasp is negotiation, the art of negotiating to win-win. Both the sides should be winning is very important. And ma'am, I believe that's the best thing and we all the audience can learn from Sir and from you, is how can we arrive at a win-win type of a negotiation in life when we are dealing with generational gaps. And I think that's the best point at which I could arrive, since there are too many questions I want to ask and time is always too short. So I think, sir, I would like to ask you this one last question to, so what is it that you admire in the youth, in today's youth, sir? So since you are connected with us through the internet a lot of the time, So I believe that's a very apropos question to ask, sir.
Yeah. Here are a few brief points I just noted. The things that differentiate today's youth from the youth that we were. Today's youth, I find they are more willing to be independent. We depended a lot on our parents. We looked up to them. Okay? That was one big difference I've noticed. Then, today's youth is less afraid of the previous generation. We were scared of our parents and our grandparents, obviously. That's one big difference. Then, today's youth are faster learners, much faster than we. We were dull compared to the youth of today. It took us a long time to learn because none of these aids existed. The only thing that I was exposed to was a book. I didn't have a computer. I didn't have TV. So how do we learn? Imagine if I need some information, I have to go to a library or go around looking for somebody. Here you just type a few keys on your laptop and you get the information. Everything's at your fingertips. So you are definitely faster learners and you can learn any new skill in a fraction of the time that it took us to learn. That is one big difference. Today's youth is more aggressive. We were a little mild. You guys negotiate far better when you go and talk. We belong to a generation where we were sort of grateful to somebody who could give us a job. We dare not bargain for salary. Today's you guys ask for what is called packages. Packages meant parcels and all. But today you all talk about salary packages, this package and that package. I'm amazed. All of you are beginning your jobs with an income which is more than what we retired on. So this is another huge difference between today's youth and the youth of my time. Then finally, you people are more willing to take risks than we were. Most of us have this middle class mentality of security and reliability, and we would not risk what we had for something which was illusory or which was uncertain. You guys, I find that you are much more willing to take risks. And lastly, I think all of you are better informed than we were. So this is fundamental differences I find between youth of our time and the youth of today. With that, I have concluded. Thank you very much for this opportunity. If you have anything further to ask, I'm willing to answer.
So thank you so much for giving us this opportunity and honoring us with your presence here. So as a token of our gratitude, we would like to present you with a digital certificate for giving us this privilege of hosting you on this session. And I've been told that the certificate will be shared in any moment through the Zoom meeting itself. So I would like to request the audience for a round of digital applause for the.
Thank you very much.
Here. Thank you so much for coming here, sir, today, sharing your experiences with us. And now I would like to proceed towards the official vote of thanks. I would like to begin with thanking sir, obviously, for coming here today, sharing your life details, so your experiences with us. I would like to thank Dr. Sapna Rakesh ma'am for sharing these wonderful viewpoints for the youth who will be shaping the world in the years to come. Hopefully learning from the points that we have heard today. I would also like to thank CA Dr. Rakesh Charya sir, Treasurer at IMS Ghaziabad, and CA Vidur Charya sir, Executive Member at IMS Ghaziabad, for providing us with numerous opportunities such as today to evolve as better and more advanced future leaders. I would also like to say my heartfelt thanks to the Dean, Chairpersons, faculty and staff members for their active involvement. A big thanks obviously goes to the CDC department for always thinking from our perspective and arranging such great talks with such honored guests, where we get to interact with successful people who inspire us to keep climbing the ladder of life and to continue living life with a purpose. In the end, I would like to express my gratitude to the IT team for this flawless online session, and lastly, our wonderful students of IMS. I now request everybody to exit the session, and we will surely share the details of the session on our social media handles very soon. Thank you so much. Have a nice day ahead and keep learning. Thank you.
Thank you, Shiv. Very nicely conducted session. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. It was great listening and connecting with you. I would ask some question on Quora now.
I'll be glad to answer.
Thanks so much.